So for over 50 years, the Roma organizations have been active throughout Europe, and it was necessary to put the Roma issue at the heart of our agenda. The calvary of the Roma minority have come out of the darkness of deliberate oblivion after the fall of the Berlin Wall and the wave of democratization. At the initiative of the World Bank and the Open Society Foundation, in 2005, the decade for the inclusion of Roma was declared. And although the initiatives for the inauguration of the decade have been launched by those organizations, in fact, it was a sublimation of the needs that came out of the emancipation of the Roma community. This coincided with the emancipation and liberalization of the countries of Central Europe. They organized themselves politically, the Roma community organized themselves politically, created their own NGOs, and now are able to dictate the agenda. With the raised awareness, the Roma community has been able to turn the Roma issue that has been considered a social issue into the context of the respect of human rights and ethnic rights. The question of equal opportunities, discrimination, equal access to social and public services, health, education, and so on, have been fully articulated, but for the most part by the Roma community. This shows that the Roma community has become able to ensure its position in the European Community of Nations. Today, when we face recession, the so-called Roma issue is an issue that has to do with development. In order to solve the issue, we have to improve the future perspectives for the whole society in all of the countries where the Roma minorities live. And this will depend on social cohesion, of course. This is why solving this issue is in the interest of all the citizens in the countries members of the decade. That is why it needs to be a priority for all of these countries, demanding from them to put in place appropriate policies to ensure that there are adequate funds and capacities. The investments have to be calculated per capita and also per member of the Roma minority. Often there have been declarations not followed by any real efforts. According to some research, billions of euros have been pumped into Eastern Germany in order to integrate it. I don't want to compare the amounts that were invested in the reintegration of Germany and with the amounts needed to integrate the Roma society. There have been several decades of funding of this whole process in Germany. And many citizens, especially in Eastern Germany, say that this has not been a success. On the other hand, less political, cultural, and financial attention has been paid to the Roma community, and we cannot expect that 10 years will be sufficient for a weak, lonely, marginalized, discriminated community to be able to identify and articulate its vital interests and its long-term goals in order to achieve integration globally and in Europe. The countries involved in the decade should create an atmosphere of understanding for the problems that the Roma population faces. The majority population is where we see those problems, especially in Croatia. or rather in Croatia as well. There has been political will in Croatia. And it is a model to be followed, but there are individual incidents that are not the fault of the state, of course, but we have to work with the citizens, we have to engage with the public in order to ensure that prejudices are eliminated. The member states of the decade do not have enough funds on their own to implement all the policies that are needed. Organizations such as the World Bank and the European Union and other organizations that focus on developmental issues, that are aware that consolidated democracy and social cohesion are prerequisites of sustainable development, play a particular role in shaping their aid in a way that will lead to the implementation not only of the narrower goals of the decade, but of the Roma issue as a whole, in a way that will, in longer run, contribute to social cohesion. The first meeting gave a green light to the Roma populations to demand from our states a greater understanding for Roma policies. Developing the Roma policy is an opportunity for the World Bank and for the European Union to go back to their roots, to go back to the ideals, to redefine Roma as part of the European identity and to ensure the respect of the rights of the Roma community in all the member states. In order to implement all of our plans, we have very little time. We have 2.5 years until the end of the decade, and that is why the European institutions and the local authorities have to analyze the situation in order to see to what extent the action plans have been implemented, and also to make a to-do list for the future. I think that we have made use of the Roma decade to that extent that the political will in our countries made it possible. We have used this opportunity, we Roma. We must make sure that the decade goes on. The second decade has to be established, and here are some of the reasons. Social change cannot be achieved in 10 years. You cannot change public awareness in such a short time. And often such changes are reversible once you're no longer so bent on achieving change. Practically all former socialist states are an example of that. They have all fallen into even deeper nationalist abyss once there was no longer the socialist, anti-nationalist agenda in place. They swung back into nationalism, and that is why we can foresee that once the decade is over, there will be a swing back into nationalism. There is an increased number of extremist assaults on the Roma population, and there is an effort to create anti-Roma opinions because of the purported benefits that they receive. Ideologically, there is this spin that the Roma actually endanger the majority population because they have greater benefits. Let me use the example of Germany. There are cultural differences between Eastern and Western Europeans, often described as the wall in the head. In 2004, there was research showing that 25% of Western Germans and 12% of Eastern Germans wanted the two Germanies to be divided yet again. Many German public figures found these data disturbing. This was published in serious publications. In the new decade, we have to set priorities that don't cost much. Education and employment. In the long run, these priorities are indeed the most important ones. Of course, health and housing will not be neglected, but we should not expend our efforts in the areas where little can be achieved, although we have achieved fantastic results in the area of public health. So the economic crisis will go on, and if we do not establish special funds for employment and self-employment of the Roma, their migrations from bad into worse will continue. As regards employment, we have to pay attention to discrimination. We have this example that we always trot out. If you have two candidates for the same job, the same qualifications, everything, who will be employed, Rome or non-Roma? Or even worse, even those who do not have, who have lesser qualifications and less experience than Roma, yet they get a job. In terms of housing, local authorities are responsible for a number of things, infrastructure and so on, and also the legalization of Roma settlements is a very important issue.
So now, 2 years ahead of the end of the first decade, we need to start developing the new concept because, as we know, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. We need to start gathering data on the results of the decade, and we need to promote successful models. It is important to involve as many as winners of the decade as possible. So we need to show what is the impact of the decade on the Roma community. We need to strengthen the solidarity within the community, show the feeling of responsibility of the winners of the decade concept. I'm primarily here thinking about the students who, once they graduate, you cannot see them anywhere anymore. Furthermore, we need to show that through the mechanism of the decade, we've obtained certain experiences, certain skills and knowledge which can be now useful for other purposes, and we can show or we need to show that the decade was important to various state and financial entities. In this way, we can show that we are moving towards our final goal, which is to make Roma taxpayers rather than social benefit users. So finally, let me say a few words about what this second decade could look like. When Jean Monnet was talking about the early integration of the European community, he said that if he was to start Euro integration all over again, instead of starting from the economy, he would start from culture. So this second transition, the second Roma decade, should be of a social cultural nature. The first decade for Roma inclusion is a project of social transition, which is still ongoing. It has changed many things for the better. In the area of education, we have achieved results that nobody ever expected. We have thousands of Roma students. We have hundreds of thousands of Roma pupils and thousands of employed Roma and resolved housing issues. But there are things that we haven't been successful with. We now have to put in order the inter-Roma relations, their behaviors, their housing culture, their political culture, the culture of memory and reformulation of the language, because if we don't do that, even after the first decade, we will have thousands of disoriented albeit educated young Roma, who will have no access to cultural institutions, and they will have no articulated system of values. So the concept that the Roma elite should tackle immediately is moral hygiene. If the elite is immoral, if the smartest amongst us are not properly respecting some rules of behavior and living in the democratic and orderly societies, then we cannot serve as an example to other Roma. So in the next decade, each of us, each individual and each of the states should be able to say openly, without any shame, yes, we are a true socially responsible country, and the Roma should be able to say, yes, I am a Roma, I am a citizen sharing the same obligations and rights as any other citizen.